All right. Welcome to the podcast. Today we have a special guest. I'd like to welcome Simona. Um, Simona was a really important part of my recovery journey because I was doing the DNRS program in the beginning, and I was doing pretty good. I started healing physically, and then around the ninth month area time, I noticed that the more I healed physically, the more my mental symptoms skyrocketed. So I started getting relentless OCD, intrusive thoughts, anxiety, panic attacks, constantly, second by second. And I was stuck. And um, I was stuck there for a while. And for me, the path was that I learned from the program was, stop, stop, stop. And it was a lot of resistance. And there was a lot of what I was, being told on the forums was distract, distract, distract. Like, you gotta, redirect, redirect. And it just made things worse. So then I saw a post on the DNRS forum, and it was Simona. She posted something about her recovery, her success story. And I always liked, watching the anybody's updates on their success story. And I started reading her story, and it was a little different than the other ones. She used a bit of different approaches for her journey, and I saw that. And normally I wouldn't, go down these rabbit holes or try any other, uh, you know, approaches because I was very, strict on my path. And then I said, but you know what? The evidence is there. She's recovered. So I messaged her, and I said, I'm going through this and that and whatever. And she knew exactly what I was dealing with. And she said, yeah, I went through that as well, but maybe you should try out the ERP response and the DARE response, the different types of therapy. And then, so I went down the rabbit hole. I tried it out, and I said, you know what? I'm going to take a leap of faith because normally I wouldn't do something like this because it would really trigger me. But the evidence was there. There was a lot of similarities because she was willing to talk to me and take the time to, let me bug her for a couple of weeks. So I went down these rabbit holes and I started noticing major shifts. And I kept going down that path, of course, periodically asking her, did you feel this? Did you notice this? Oh, this is interesting. She'd be like, yep, exactly. That's what I felt, blah, blah, blah. And then, then after I started moving forward really, really quickly, and then I recovered. And I thought it would be really great to have her on my show so that we can, talk about the gist of what you were going through, how you found the ERP, your symptoms. We'll have I'll have a trigger warning. We'll do some symptom talk and what programs you used, what you noticed worked and what didn't work. And yeah, we'll start from there. So I'd
Yeah,
like to welcome Simona. Thanks for being on the show.
thanks. It's really nice to be here. And I feel like we've never even communicated face to face ever. So yeah, it's really good to connect. Um,
Awesome. Yeah.
yeah, so I think in hindsight, I can see that it was a journey that started when I was super, super young. But I really found the brain retraining world and that space, I think right in 2020, right at the beginning of the COVID time. And I had this allergic reaction to an antibiotic,
Mm-hmm.
and it just felt like overnight my life totally changed. It was like a fear response turned on and just stayed at like 1,000% high.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in some ways, I was really lucky because within, I think, maybe 2 months, I found a practitioner that recommended that I try this DNRS program. And really, within that 2 months, what had happened is I stopped sleeping. I was like, I thought I knew what anxiety was before. This was like anxiety times 5,000.
Yep.
I had all sorts of body pains, just so much back pain, foot pain, all sorts of stuff going on. And that was just kind of in the first 2 months, and more symptoms came to add as I went on. So ultimately, I tried a bunch of stuff, a bunch of things at the beginning, and then found DNRS, was certain that I had found the final solution, the best solution. Um, and it did provide some relief. because it explained to me that my fight or flight response was turned on. And I really aligned with that. And it also taught me that when the fight or flight response is turned on, you start to make all these associations with food, environment, people, and that just goes nowhere good. It just leads to a life of avoidance. So that part I was really grateful for. But what it also taught me, which didn't really work for me, was this idea that I should just keep turning away from my distress. And that's where it got a little bit messy for me.
Oh yeah, know that feeling.
Yeah, so in some ways, I was able to tolerate how horrible I felt in a better way by following that program. And then ultimately, I ended up very much where you did, where there was this kind of really high anxiety. There was more issues with my body, vertigo, POTS, the big list that kind of we all end up having, digestive disorders. And but the big piece for me was sleep, and then ultimately became this OCD cycle of intrusive thoughts. Yeah. And so that was the piece that, in a lot of ways, actually, even though it was the worst and it was so distressing and horrible, ultimately it was what set me free. And the way that it did was because I decided, even though the program's like, this is all you need, it's really clear, we're going to, you just keep doing this and you will, your brain has no choice but to change. Ultimately, I was like, no, something's not working. And I'm getting more of these scary thoughts and violent thoughts and um, all sorts of, like, about my health, about my children, about all sorts of things. And yeah, I just got to a breaking point where I was like, this is not working for me. And so that's when eventually I kind of turned to the internet and I found the dare response was my first piece. And through implementing that, through listening to him, he's incredible, using his app, through understanding the work of Dr. Claire Weeks, which has informed the DARE response. She was an amazing Australian physician. And then eventually I started to work with an ERP person and really learned about this idea of exposure and really moving towards and allowing yourself to feel the full response without interrupting it with compulsions. And so for me, that ultimately became the game changer, which also led me into doing eventually more emotional work, which was kind of the second game changer for me.
Yeah, for me that was huge to to first of all try something different because I was scared to try anything different. And but I saw the evidence with you, so I was like, okay, you know what, I'm going to try this. And I tiptoed around it and I tried it, and I did feel relief because I was processing some of my feelings at first, the the what if thoughts or whatever I was dealing with, the emotions. And I asked, I would process it. I go, come towards me. Let's do this. Let's try this out. And I would just feel it dissolving in my throat and my chest, and it would cut like in half. And I'm like, okay, this is working. But at first, it's like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Right? I'm going towards it. I'm not distracting, and I got relief from it right away. Even though it was still a shit show in the background, I still, it. I saw the evidence and I saw, okay, this is what I got to deal with. And I asked you, I'm like, does it eventually start to calm down? You said, yeah, it does. Just stick to it. Just keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the hardest part for all of us is when we're in that state, we become so controlling and hyper responsive to everything. And we have all these core beliefs based on our life, maybe on our trauma, that it's like, I have to keep it together. I have to hold it all together. And we just cling so tightly. And we feel like if we let go into the activation, we will die. Like,
Yeah.
that's how we feel. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, same thing with me. It was. Well, it was relentless, right? The OCD was just relentless. It didn't let off, and I had to trust because the evidence I found with you, I had to trust that this was the path. But that little bit of relief when I did it told me, okay, this is the path. So it was a lot of trust. Okay, just stick to it, and know that you are gonna feel like shit. This is gonna get worse because sometimes people think, well, if I'm doing a method, the journey from here to here, I'm supposed to get relief. When actually, most of the time, you're gonna feel worse, right? And people, when they feel worse, they abandon ship. They think, okay, well, this is something wrong. I got to stop.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And there's always, I find with everyone I work with, there's always this one super scary core fear that is hanging over their head. And they're like, if I do this, it's going to equal activation. And activation means I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to end up homeless. I'm going to ruin my family. I'm going to be in jail or alone forever. And these, there's like five or six, and it repeats among everyone. And it's what holds us hostage to the fear.
That's funny. That's what I mentioned. There's the major, usually five big alarms that stood with me for a year and a half, and then there's the in between guys, the menu for that week. So the Tuesday it'll be Wednesday, and then Thursday will be a new one. But the five main ones hang out for a long time, and you have to be patient with them because they take time. For me, they lasted right up to the end of my just the end of my recovery when I started to recover, right up to the end. And actually, the end it spiked up really high, and I thought, "Am I starting all over again?" And that's when and you know what? After a while, I didn't even know I recovered really until
Yeah.
I noticed it, which was also weird. It tells you that you have to be able to allow it to be there no matter what. And if you fully allow and don't notice that you recovered, that's when you know you allowed.
Just, yeah, 100%. The whole journey seems to be a metaphor for allowing whatever is happening in your life to be happening. It is already happening.
Yeah, exactly. I had to learn to be scared. I had to learn to be uncomfortable every
Yeah,
day. Yeah.
every day. And, you know, the gift of this process, even though I'm sure people listening might not feel like it's a gift right now, but ultimately, this gift is we get to understand how our mind works. Our mind just makes thoughts. It makes all sorts of thoughts, and we can choose to believe them, and choose to act on them, or we can choose to just say, oh, there's a thought, let it pass, and I'm going to live my life anyways, even if it brings up all this activation. It's safe to have all this activation.
Yep.
What's it just feels unsafe, but it's safe.
Right. Yeah, it is a tough journey. I know. Like for me, it took me 3 years fully to recover. But I'm sure if what I know now, if I were to go back, I'd probably be able to do it within 2 years. But I needed to have the times where I fell on my face to get the experience. I need to experience my symptoms and have the freakouts, have the catastrophizing times, because that's how you build the leverage. You go, oh, you again, you're back. I'm getting to know you now. We're becoming friends now. Okay, it's not so bad. And it's like you have to have those initial first ones that are just a shit show. Where I slipped and went to the hospital first 3 times, but then eventually it's repetition. You're like, okay, I actually feel comfortable that you're here. I actually feel reassurance that you're here because I know eventually you will go because I see the pattern.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it becomes so helpful to kind of start to know or map the different ways that it shows up for ourselves. So everyone reacts to adrenaline differently. So for me, it was heart rate, it was dizziness, it was pain. There was all these things associated with these adrenaline dumps. At the beginning, like you, I thought they were super serious. And I kept running to the doctor, kept trying to take the right thing, figure it out, or I had all these associations. So then I really was starting to react with histamine or whatever because I was so scared in the moment of these different reactions. And so, but eventually, once we know how it shows up for us, and we can just kind of name it, like, oh, here it is again. And then we are eventually can step back and not overreact to it and call the bluff of the fear.
Exactly. Yeah, and it doesn't help that our Canadian system has free healthcare, so we're going to use it 20 times in a month. Maybe if I had to pay for it, I wouldn't, be there as much as I was. But oh well, that's the way it was.
Yeah, that's funny. And I think it's, even for our US friends, I mean, that's what happens, right? It's like functional doctor to psychiatrist to emergency room to osteopath to this. And it's for some people, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. And all that's happening is an adrenalized system, a sensitized system, and an over responsive fear response, all this thinking, and this control of trying to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. How long would you say that your journey from recovery took from the right method going, okay, or well, for me, I would say DNRS, 3 years it took me, and I adjusted halfway through.
Mm-hmm.
But I was technically had limbic issues for 20 years before that. But and this was constantly researching, trying everything out there, but not until I started doing the mind body thing that things started to change. So I would say 3 years for me. How long? What did you say it took you?
Yeah, so I did DNRS for about 9 months. I think at about 6 months, I found ERP, the DARE response, maybe 7 months into that. Started to make a big shift with that. And then in 9 months, I joined Primal Trust program. And for me, that with the ERP piece was the big change, but it was still like a journey. So I think by 13 months, I kind of said I was like recovered because I wasn't like a chicken with my head cut off running around.
Right. Yeah.
But it was still like another full year before I consistently felt quite settled. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I've noticed that some people that say that have recovered, uh, like some of the DNRS stories, and just people that I've known, some of them told me after that, actually, you know what? It took me another full year to really realize that I needed another year to really say I was recovered.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then getting back into the swing of life is another thing.
Yes, exactly. And if you don't know these tools of, um, these tools that you know and that you teach, these tools of meeting and befriending fear, then every little part of the journey is going to just throw you off. Once you know these tools, though, you just expect, like, oh, I'm just meeting an adrenaline response, more fear thought. I know how to do this, so I can step back in incrementally.
Yeah, exactly. So you also dealt with, for me, I think I had mast cell activation syndrome. Were you dealing with that?
Yeah, I ended up not with my naturopathic doctor. We did kind of no further tests other than a bajillion heart tests that I had.
Yeah.
Ultimately, yeah, I mean, I had all the histamine responses. I had the full gamut that everyone seems to have, but without the diagnosis.
Right. Oh yeah. I could have went down all those rabbit holes. Well, the Facebook groups were the worst for me, right?
Yeah,
Uh, so yeah, the gut issues I had, they were the main ones. Heart issues. I also had tachycardia. My heart rate was always up at 120, 110 at rest. Um, that was and before my rest was at, I would say, 65, 70.
yeah,
And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Why is it jumping all of a sudden? Like, is it my biome, or am I having some sort of heart attack issue or clot? It's like, and they would check my heart over and over and over again. They're like, this is not an emergency, sir. I'm like, yeah, but look at how high it is. They're like, no, that doesn't. People have that sometimes. I'm like, but I don't. Well, yeah, you do. Like, so I was lost and I didn't understand what was going on until I started doing the work, and then it started to calm down. And also, my pulse came back. Before, I couldn't feel a pulse.
right.
It, it felt like I was in the next room, and that was puzzling. I remember I was in my living room running around in circles trying to. I was like screw it. If I get a heart attack, let's do it right now. And I'd feel it would still be like nothing. And then my blood pressure going up and down, my heart rate, coming up from a anxiety attack, all of a sudden you hear don't, and you're expecting it to go. So it was doing like a lot of opposites, right? And really screwing with me. And yeah, and then gut issues. I had the two safe foods. I had the rice and the beef. Did you also experience having safe foods?
Oh my God. The food, yeah, because I had already worked in the natural health industry for like 20 years, it was like I knew all about, the lectins and, all these, the histamine and all of these different diets and rules. And yeah, I think at one point I was down to maybe like 10 foods that I was
Yeah.
eating. But the other part that was really wild was the blood sugar. And it was like I had to eat like 6,000 calories a day every 2 hours just to kind of maintain my 120, 130 heart rate.
Which is interesting. I didn't have that issue as much, but I'm starting to talk to a lot of people that are bringing that up. I'm seeing that pattern, and I never asked you about that, but that's good that we're talking about it. I'm
Yeah.
seeing that pattern, and it makes sense because you're in a state of fight or flight. The brain is trying to protect you, right? So, and that regulated me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now I can, before I literally couldn't go for more than 2 hours without some sort of food, and it would feel desperate. I had to have it beside my bed. I'd wake up, crazy issues. I'd have to eat something to be able to fall back asleep. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so how did you modify that through your journey? Because people are I know people right now that are stuck with that. They're not sure if it's a limbic issue or if it's a real issue that. And for me, I think, you know what, it's all the same thing technically, because the limbic is becomes real. Whatever you're dealing with your nervous system, it becomes like a real problem. So how did you tackle that
Yeah.
to get to that next level so that you can, build your leverage?
Yeah. Yeah. So I kind of followed the same idea, and this is what I recommend for people too. It's like, first get checked out however you need to, right? And so I always just kind of say that and put that to the side. Once the doctor has come back and once again been like, there's nothing wrong with you, then I kind of dealt with it in two ways. One, I just let myself eat when I needed to eat. And I was like, okay, fine. And then the second part is that I started to incrementally train to push it out a little bit further and further and tolerate the anxiety response that my body would have when it felt so unsafe and it was trying to always have food close by. And it really made sense to me in terms of survival. It's like, of course, the body would be trying to secure food and really be eating all the time. And so I would just, this is kind of how I did everything. It's like, if I notice it, I'm aware. And then I just stay with the discomfort in my body and I don't get alarmed about it. And I have compassion for myself. And then I move on. And then if I need to eat in half an hour, go for it. But I can wait through and have this anxiety in the meantime.
Right, and it eventually opened up to the point where it was a normal amount of gaps where it was just normal.
Yeah, and now I can, before actually through my whole life, I could never go long periods without eating. But now I can just go hours and hours. I can, go to sleep and not wake up and then, eat 5 hours later. And I don't get the same hypoglycemic feelings anymore.
Right. Did you notice any differences in what kind of foods you're eating? Did you change your foods that you were taking in during that time?
Well, this is another way the DNRS program was good for me because I really bought into their idea of over associating danger with foods and that we shouldn't do that. And so even though I had been like an avid health food eater my entire life and really I do believe in good quality foods and organic foods, But I also started to challenge myself and be like, yeah, maybe I can eat a bite of my kid's croissant, or or maybe I can eat sugar. Maybe I don't need to stay away from lectins or whatever. And so I actually started to eat everything incrementally because I didn't want any limitations on what I could do. But then eventually my diet and the craving of my body, ended up being pretty healthy actually, mostly like vegetables, some carbs, a lot of protein.
Yep. I know. I've been also thinking about this lately because after I recovered, I started gaining a lot of weight because I was eating all the foods and I was enjoying every food. I was like, I haven't eaten a tomato in a long time. I haven't eaten cake in a long time. Christmas is coming. I don't care anymore. And
Yeah.
then because of that, I did that for a year. I was like, forget this. I'm going to eat everything and I have a food party, right? And then eventually, the weight started to come on. I'm like, oh, that's fine, whatever. But then I started creating habits. That's became my new routine of eating not so good. So then now I'm at a place where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna start having, I'm gonna cut everything out and have like almost like safe foods again, right? Just to cut out the habits, and then reintroduce foods and create the routine that I like with food because I find a lot of my recovery had to do with routine.
Hmm.
I had a schedule. We're gonna do this, and whatever triggered me, I'd tuck it in there so that I wouldn't put it on a pedestal because I noticed there were some things that, if you're going to expose yourself to it and if you put it on a pedestal, it might focus an alarm,
Yeah.
right? So then I would tuck it in and I would get through it and I would reprogram that to turn off the alarms on that. So with me gaining all this weight, I thought, well, maybe I'll do the same approach, cut all the old pathways of habit and create a routine with food just for a little bit and then reintroduce foods and then pick what I want. Have a program of foods that I like. So if it's a little bit of carbs here, a little bit of vegetables here, and almost eat the same thing every day. Maybe mix up the vegetables here and there, and I'm okay with that. I don't have to have a big variety of food every day. I'm okay with having, copycat food every day. I'm easy going.
Hmm.
So, did you notice that you were gaining some weight after recovery?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think two parts. One was my heart rate wasn't 130.
Yeah.
So, and then I was eating all foods. And also I was trying to have an attitude of like non-restriction and play and truly just enjoying life, my kids. So yeah, I ended up gaining like 30 pounds in that year, kind of after the initial year. But I really tried to treat it in a new way too, because I noticed that I would start thinking about my body and I'd be like, oh, I should do this, or I should change this, or this isn't right. And so I kind of folded that into my journey too. And I was like, what would it be like to just love this body, this bigger body, and not allow my brain to hook onto it as if it's one more thing to change. And I found the more I just really leaned into being okay and being like, I'm okay at this size and, I can do this. Then I found naturally I became interested in eating less and, the foods
It
that were.
kind of let go. Did your mind your
Oh,
kind of let go the because I know that it holds on to weight for defense mechanisms. So
yeah,
it might finally let go. Okay, I don't think we're having a famine coming. I don't think we need to hold on to storage.
that's right. Yeah. And I think it's the more I just met it with kindness and love, accepted it, and then the more regulated I got, the body was like, okay, yeah, we don't need to hold on to this. We don't need to hold on to everything. And then the other piece for me, and I had to do a lot of a work around emotions and suppressed emotions in my journey. And I noticed with the weight piece that it was generating this feeling of like shame, like I'm bad, and there's this shame there. So instead of using food to have to deal with and experience that emotion, I just was like, oh, I'm noticing this is generating shame. So I'm not going to get on the hamster wheel about this, but I am going to start to do exposures on the feeling of shame and lean into it and feel it or rejection or abandonment, and all those things that were driving the compulsive behaviors, I started to do ERP exposures on the emotion. That was a game changer for me too.
I think that might be the last piece to my puzzle because, I'm fully recovered. I'm eating all the foods. I'm eating all the chili. Like, I never thought I could ever. It's like before I used to think of it as magma. Now I can eat it all, no problem, right? And the weight was always, the last thing that was, and I think it also, like, my mom was like that, but my dad was, you
Yeah,
know, have two people giving them the same foods and you might have different weights, which
totally.
is which is interesting. Like people in prison, people, and my dad's limbic system is very calm. He's a smoker. He eats what he wants. He's thin. He doesn't have any blood pressure problems. He has no cholesterol problems. My mom, a worry wart. She's got anxiety. She's overweight, cholesterol, all those problems. So I think the limbic system has a lot to do with the weight and, 99% of the problems that we have. So I find that really interesting how feed the two people the same foods and they'll have different, they'll come out differently. And why is that, right? It makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me that there's a protective response in our body that would hold on to weight based on our current story or maybe our ancestors' story or whatever that is. It's like we're just trained to be ready for a famine.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's like you hear stories where people they live off of canned soup, smoke a cigar, one cigar a day, eat a Snickers bar, and they live to be 104. And you got the guy like me trying to do the carnivore diet, or somebody else they're fasting, they're doing the carnivore diet, or strict diets, and they're forcing health. They're trying to find the fix it methods, and they've got all the supplements, and they end up being chronically ill and die at 60.
Yeah, I think, there's really something to being able to just be happy and play and step out of the anxiety response. And, if we naturally find our way to certain diets, or even if during our recovery in parallel, it's like, you know what, I'm going to do this diet and I'm going to do this brain retraining. That's fine. But if you keep going back to it over and over again in this anxious way and become afraid of living and eating other foods, or you have to carry a backpack of food all the time, all of that is kind of replaying that fear response and being like, I need special things, I need accommodations, I'm not safe in this world.
Yeah, that's very true. It seems like 99% of the people out there have a eating disorder and we don't even know it because we're programmed to think that.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly know I did. It was, being in the natural foods industry for so long, doing every cleanse you could imagine, every diet you could imagine. And, I really framed it as like, oh, I'm just being healthy. But ultimately, there was a lot of control issues, there was a lot of fear issues, you know, and it was all interwoven into that. The perfect storm for me really brought up what already existed in my life in this kind of underground way.
Yeah, I also started thinking about fasting. Is also I think fasting is something that is there for us as a defense mechanism to keep you alive. It's when you're facing famine, it's able to switch over to ketosis because you need to because you have periods where there's no food, so it's a defense mechanism. And it's working brilliantly, but I think people use it as a way to diet, and I think that could backfire because you're teaching the brain that we're in a dangerous situation, and it's going to hold on. And if you're not eating for a week, and it sees food in your cupboards, it sees that your wife's eating cake, it's going to take that opportunity for you to feed,
Mm,
which could also backfire, and then you binge eat. You lose the weight and you binge eat. You're fasting, and then you're eating, so your nervous system is going up and down, and that puts a lot of stress on your body when all of a sudden you're eating, and putting all these energy stores on, and then you're fasting, no food. Because I
mhm,
remember for me, I tried doing fasting through the beginning of my journey because I was trying everything, and it triggered a bigger stress response. It made things worse, actually.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, anything that we put a lot of fear and attention on, and anything, almost like anything we're trying to get rid of by over focusing on it, we create more. And part of this is just how the brain reacts. It's like, oh, Simona's thinking about this all the time. She focused on it all the time. She's got all this fear around it. And like, this must be really important. So let's keep giving her more of this, and more of this, and more of this. And the way that we get the brain to deprioritize it is that we're not afraid of it. We're not giving it a ton of attention. And actually, we're accepting it exactly as it is. And then it's like, oh, okay, this isn't wrapped up in my survival, so I can let this go.
So it'd almost be like with all my symptoms that I dealt with, when I did exposure, I would take 10 steps back. Things would get worse.
Hmm.
And I'd have to repeat that over and over and over again until I uh, became indifferent to the fear of the setback, right?
Yes.
So it'd go from a 10 to a 5 to a 3 to eventually meh. So with food, technically, if I were to do the same approach, I would probably gain weight and take 10 steps back. I would see that. I'd be triggered by that and go, look at my boobs, look at my gut, look at how I can't put on the clothes, how I'm losing my breath. But that's the exposure part of it where you are taking the 10 steps back. You have to train in that moment to feel indifferent by repetition. So I have to feel the fear of me being overweight and sitting in it
Hmm.
until I'm indifferent, and then eventually that's what I'm thinking. I haven't
Yeah.
got that far yet.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like sitting in that, what does this make me feel? Oh, it makes me feel vulnerable, right? Maybe vulnerable to rejection. Maybe it reminds me of shame I had when I was younger. Or maybe it's even my parents' story and it's kind of like living through me. And so we need to expose ourselves to that strong discomfort that's driving our actions. And when we can do that, the nervous system settles. And then the side effect is, whatever it is that we're trying to push away or change seems to kind of dissolve on its own. It's like a bit of magic.
Yeah. Well, I see like if you look at the Asian food, they eat a lot of rice and they're like when I watch them eat, like cuz I like watching the shows where they're eating all these foods, right? The mukbaos or whatever you call them. They're thin and they're eating, rice, meat, all the stuff in like massive quantities and they're no problem.
Yeah.
So I find that so interesting. But the thing is doing the process, even though you have the methods, you know that this is the answer, doing it is still hard to do because if I look in the mirror, I'm not happy with what I see, right?
Hmm.
Because you're your own critic, you're not happy, but it's up to you to be indifferent to what you're not happy with, and that's hard to do for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to do. And, I like to try to get people to like do the zoom out, right? It's like, yeah, this is how it is right now. And, if you really zoom out, it's like this is going to be a small part of, your life that you're going to have, this part of your body the way that you don't want it to be. And then on top of that, when I think about nature, like looking at nature, it's like, we see a tree and it grows or it has, a big bloom and we're not like, oh God, like the tree's too big. It's doing it wrong, right? We're just like, oh wow, that's really beautiful. It looked different last time, and now it looks like this, and we have all these beliefs based on society and how things should and shouldn't look. And something I like to do a lot during recovery is like, I don't know what my body's supposed to look like right now. Like, yeah, maybe I think it should be thin, but it's not right now. Maybe actually this might be a healing phase that I really need. And so I don't want to skip it. And then my body's going to change again. And let me just let it happen and be the witness of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's gonna be some people watching this and going, "This is what I was looking for. This is the answer I needed." Because some people are on the fence because the exposure might look unhealthy, and all kinds of alarms will go up. What if thoughts?
Yeah.
But now, with you talking about it, it gives you the courage to keep going, right?
Yeah, like play the long game.
Right. It is a long game. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, did you deal with any chronic fatigue syndrome?
Um, a little bit I did. Not it wasn't a huge part. For me, the biggest part was the upside. Like really intense insomnia, sleeping less than 1 hour a night for
Yeah.
months on end. But once in a while, I would have a crash where I felt just no energy. And I also had like emotional crashes where I felt empty, like just nothing, just totally blank. Um, and
That's
again,
another thing. The nothingness. I made a video about that. That feeling is the worst feeling ever.
yeah,
Worse than fear. Fear, it's like I know there's a target there. You see it. You feel. You know what you're afraid of. When there's nothing there, that's like the first feeling is, am I going to be stuck like this? Is this
yeah,
going to be because things that I loved, I would test myself. I remember I had the nothingness feeling off and on for a week or a couple of days, and it would last. If it lasted 2 days, then I started to panic and be
yeah,
like, okay, well, let's play guitar. Let's test this out. And I wouldn't want to play. I'm like, I don't want to play guitar. Oh no! And then I would skyrocket. I would catastrophize, right? And okay, what else do I love to do? Think about it. Oh, I don't really care about that. And then you don't get it. Nothing excites you, and it's the most terrifying feeling because all you hear about all the stories about people with suicide or all these things, and you think, am I going to be one of these people? I'm going to be one of these celebrities that
mm,
they're going to be on medications and they never find the way out. Am I going to have and then of course schizophrenia or all you start to loop on other mental things, of
yeah.
course, um, and eventually it would pass. But the nothingness for me was scarier than any other symptom.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's the worst feeling. And you're right, it would, yeah, it would just create its own OCD loop, right? And yeah, so for me, I think that was one of the most challenging, obviously, the insomnia. And then sometimes I would have the full energy dip where I felt like I couldn't move or do anything. But by then, I had a lot of exposure experience under my belt. And I was really good at just being like, great, this is how it is today. This is for the best. I believe it. I trust it. And like, I'm good with it. And I think because I showed up with that attitude of like, yeah, okay, this is how it is today. And I gave it no fear and really very little attention, then it would pass.
Yeah. For me, I was even though I knew the methods, I was. This is probably halfway through my recovery. It would happen, and I would know what's going on, right? But it would still, of course, it still scare the shit out of me. But eventually, I knew it would pass. And eventually, when it happened like 10 times, then I would be like, "Oh, there you are. I'll let you do what you got to do. It's okay."
Yeah. Yeah. And, I know it can be so, it can be complex for people. And obviously, this is just my experience with it. But I do think there's something so helpful. Two things. One is, it's an automatic nervous system. So none of this are things that we're doing on purpose. All the symptoms are real. The pain is real. The suffering is real. It's happening automatically. So I always think that's important to state. And we do have some choice around how we respond. And actually, that response is our way out.
Yeah, amazing. Another thing I'm just going over. I'm trying to think about all the little compartments of symptoms. One of them was, this one was a hard one, was muscle tension.
Oh,
Um, I had muscle tension, well, in my stomach, of course, because I was always holding it in. Whatever I was looping on, I always tell people I should have got a six pack out of this. Um, and pelvic floor pain, bladder pain, stabbing bladder pain. I had problems pooping because it just closed, like it
oh,
literally closed. So I had to get a finger caught and get in there and let it come out by itself. And I had to do this coping mechanism for a year and a half. And I know some other people that have this. And they use enemas, right?
yeah.
And and eventually I knew what it was, and I also know that the muscle thing was one of the five, right? The muscle thing, it's one of the last things to go because it's directly related to whatever you're dealing with. If you're working on XYZ symptom, and
Hmm.
then next one this symptom, and then you're going through the journey, it always affects your muscles because your well your gut also,
Yeah.
right, was one of the last things for me to go because it's totally linked with the muscles. If you're feeling a war up here, your muscles react with it, your gut reacts with it. So you might, if you're dealing with a stressful thing last week, this week you might be having foods that are back out again,
Yeah.
right? And then something I dealt with yesterday, all of a sudden for the next week I got muscle tension and the stabbing pains in my bladder, and the whole bottom area is just like this constantly. And then you can be mindful and go, you know what? I'm going to release it because sometimes you wouldn't even notice it. I would release it. Okay. It's a bit of a coping mechanism. And sometimes I had to do coping mechanism. I had to do stretches because the stabbing was so much.
Yeah.
And then eventually I knew to let it do its thing. You can't force it to stop. And then I remember asking you, did you deal with muscle pain? You're like, yeah, eventually it melts away. I'm like, oh, okay. And that gave me more motivation and courage to just keep going. And eventually it lifted.
Yeah. It was really one of the things I loved about our conversations that we used to have was just how open you were to trying it. And you were someone who was, you were like, this scares me, this is hard, and I'm going to do it. And I
Yeah.
love that. And I think that is the attitude. And I know how hard it is because I know what it's like to be there. But if people can have that attitude and just find the smallest bit of trust and just try it, then you can start to find some of this relief. And I love that, you really took things to heart and would really implement them in your life. And I just think that that is how people recover from these challenging situations.
Yeah, you can usually tell, well, my experience, who's going to recover and who isn't. The ones that really do the work and stick to it and are willing to fail and get back up and do it and go towards the fear, or the ones that know everything about everything, do 10 different modalities, but don't really do the work,
Mhm.
are on the fence. They're not really making the choice and they don't stick to it. And they always say, well, that doesn't work. That program doesn't work. This doesn't work. Okay, well, did you did you do the visuals? Well, I did them on Tuesday for 30 seconds and it doesn't work, right? They don't stick to it.
Mhm.
And because it's too hard, or I don't like visuals, or I don't like the way I'm triggered. Why am I triggered? Well, you're supposed to be triggered. Well, I
Mhm.
don't. And then they back away. But they know all they can, theoretically, they can tell you all about it. But you have to actually do the work, get uncomfortable, and stick to it because it's a roller coaster. And I
Yeah.
find that a lot too with that pattern. You usually can tell who's going to recover and who isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. The people who are willing, I don't know if it's, I mean, it's part willingness. And I think for some of us, it was like, I don't know, I was like circling the drain. There was no other option for me that I couldn't take any medication. I couldn't take any vitamins. I was still making, I had to make a living for my family. I had to show up for my kids. It was like, I have no options but for something to work. And so I'm going to do it no matter what. And it was like sometimes I had to crawl out of bed, like roll across the floor with all my vertigo and like
Yeah.
hang out with my kids while I'm having a panic attack and feeling like I'm actually upside down in my body, filled with body pain. And it's like I just showed up and I just kept showing up and kept doing the work. And, when you do it like that, something does happen.
Yeah. I was just lucky. Like, I had coaches, and some of them were okay, and some of them, well, they're all of them were, they cost a pretty penny. When you don't have money, it's you got to figure out, you got to do things anyway. You have no options.
Yeah.
So, I spent a lot of money on coaches. Some of them were, I was spending like $1,200 for like 8 sessions here and there, and the only reason why I was using some of these coaches was for reassurance. I was like, did you have this? Did you recover? Yes, I did. Okay. And then I talk with you totally free and you're willing to, and that's where I got the golden nuggets. This is what changed my life. And
Yeah.
I think you appreciated that I was willing to do the work and I was willing to trigger myself and fall on my face and do it, right? And you saw that I was improving, so then it wasn't something that where you were wasting your time, or because for me, I don't mind supporting somebody that's willing to do the work. Then I'll support. But if it's somebody that's just coming back for reassurance, then we're not really helping anybody.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I always had this feeling, I don't know, sometimes I started to really trust life through my journey. And sometimes people would just come into my space and I would just have a sense about them. And I've always wanted this work to go out to as many people as possible. And I had a sense when I met you that you were going to recover and you were going to bring this work to many people. And so I was like, great, I get to be a part of this too.
Yeah, I'm lucky. Thank you for your patience,
Of
because
course.
so I'm sure you look at your phone and you see, oh yeah, and one more thing.
Yeah, I really, it's so interesting because I remember, and it just was like, this is what I should be doing. And I really trusted it. And then it's been so great to see you make your business, put things out there, help so many people. Because this is one part of recovery that people skip, this like meeting fear, befriending it, looking it in the face, doing exposures. And it's the most critical part of recovery. And just frankly, having a good life.
Yeah, exactly. Right when people, I find it interesting. Right when people, it's that one spot. It's like halfway through recovery. That's when people decide to quit. It's like, no, this is when you got to keep going,
Yeah,
and things will come screaming at you. Your alarms will scream at you because you're doing things that out of the safe zone.
yeah.
So that's expected.
Yeah, it's like, it reminds me a bit of like the story of like the Buddha, like right before he became enlightened, and he's like sitting under the tree, and then he meets, Mara, which is like symbolic for all these, you know, fears or temptations or whatever, and they come to him, in his mind or, in imagination or physically, and he just names it. I see you, Mara. I see you, Mara. And that's ultimately what we all had to end up doing. I see you, fear. I see you, thought. I see you,
Yep.
symptom, and I'm not going to react.
Right. Exactly. Did you? Oh yeah. Did you deal with any multiple chemical sensitivities?
Oh, oh my God, I had the worst. I couldn't even wash my hands with natural soap
Right.
because it was like I could smell it. It was like on fire in my brain when I would smell it. It was so bad. Even natural sense of like if it rained, the smell of the earth. It was complete insanity. So yes, I did.
Yeah.
And I just didn't allow it. I just kept going and kept going, and I had a song which was like, "Smells can't hurt me, smells can't hurt me."
Yeah.
And I would sing it and walk with my kids, and it would be horrible, and eventually it passed.
Right. With me, it was. It took me a week to get over it. It kind of hit me out of nowhere. Well, this was the beginning of my journey. I just started DNRS. I started hearing about the multiple chemical sensitivity, and I think that triggered an idea in my brain to go, let's do it. Okay. So then all of a sudden I was reacting to everything. And so I started having all these air filters in the house. I
Yes.
told my wife to stop putting these air sensors, like
Yeah.
smell and whatever you call them. Um, so we had to take all those down. I got the place checked for mold. He said, it looks good. I spent $500 to get it checked for mold because I was paranoid about mold, and I still wasn't convinced. And then, yeah, we had these air filters everywhere. I was reacting like crazy. In my car, I was everywhere I went. It was like a war zone. Everything was a war zone. And then I said, okay, I got to train on this stuff. So I started with very lightly with perfumes,
Hmm.
colognes, and believe it or not, bleach. Only because I had memories from these.
Yeah.
So I used the DNRS method for multiple chemical sensitivity, which was doing a round.
Yeah.
So what I did was for cologne, I used Eternity because it reminded me of high school when I was young, because that's where I wore.
Hmm.
And then I would spray a little bit in like a tissue, and I kind of like walk by it, and then I would think about my teenage years, and it would just come flooding, right? It would just feel so good, and of course I'd be triggered and everything, and then I would take a break and engage in something else, and I'd come back and I'd put a little bleach in a paper towel, and also kind of like keep it at a distance and kind of right, and it would go into a memory of me helping my mom clean apartment when somebody moved out, and that was a good memory. And
Yeah.
within a week, and I did this, I broke this up throughout the day, 3 times a day, come back to it, blah, blah, and I noticed that, oh, I can bring it in closer because my sensitivity was so insane. It was like a dog's nose. I remember while this, before I started recovering from this, I went to my mom's house. I stayed there because I had a panic attack or whatever. And I'm like, I smelled bleach. Where's she's like, oh, downstairs. I'm like, okay, can you empty it? Because it's driving me insane. She's like, okay. So she went downstairs. She came back up. She's like, okay, I did it. I'm like, you sure? Did you really do it? She's like, yeah, I did. I did it. She lied to me. She didn't do it because she didn't want to. I don't know. She just didn't want to. She's like, okay, whatever. She thought everything's in my head, and I said, no, you did not empty that bleach. So she's like, okay. So she finally emptied it, and I was able to smell that from the top upstairs all the way from the smell from downstairs.
Yeah. It's
And
wild.
after doing the rounds, it took me about a week, and then I was fine again.
Yes, that's so good. I think people get really stuck because they research it and then they're like, oh, it's my liver and it's this and I have this genetic expression and or it is harmful and every time I smell it, it's ruining my brain and so we there's all these stories and theories and when we believe them so deeply, we won't even do the exposure to be willing to create a new response in the system. So it's like the earlier you understand it, the better, and the more willing you are to engage with the fight or flight response, you know, the more quickly you're going to be able to move through those sensitivities and not really firm up those neural networks with this belief that it's dangerous. Of course, we don't want to be around chemicals all the time, and I don't even have any in my house on a regular basis, but a little bit smell here and there is not dangerous.
Yeah, it's actually good because it reaffirms to the program that it's not dangerous. So having it once in a while is good because it's a reminder. No, we're safe. We're good. And if you're not regulated and your bucket's at full,
Yeah,
right? If it's up here and your baseline's at 1,000, you can react to anything. It could be mold. It could be anything that
yeah,
that doesn't matter. So it becomes, actually, it's irrelevant. It's not the food. It's not the lime. It's not the mold, right? It's that you you're you've become very sensitive and you're perceiving that it's that. So that gets the bad rap for it, right?
100%. Yeah, yeah. And the best way, and even though it feels like the hardest, it's actually one of the easiest ways to bring the system down is to start to do exposures, to stop being afraid of fear. And then you can get regulated enough that if you want to, you could do treatments for different things. If you want to, you could go many different ways with things. Maybe you won't need to eventually. But this first part is so critical just to start to empty the bucket.
Yeah. Um, like for me, it's you have to train yourself around the idea that the senses are not dangerous, and then when you're recovered, then you can choose to not be around it. But if you start having, you start joining a movement of telling people that they can't have perfume because it's horrible for you. Sure, it might be in some sense not good for you. Anything. If you're around if that case, if you're crazy about perfumes, then, well, what about Facebook? What about the news? What about all the materials that we're surrounded with, the Wi-Fi? Pick and choose. There's a million other things that could technically hurt you that
Yeah,
we should, it's like pick your battle. You can't
yeah.
really, so why not regulate and not focus on it for the rest of your life and just live life? Because, if you want to be a part of a movement with fragrances, it seems pointless to me because it'll just keep affecting you.
No, it's like, I see a lot of people go into extreme avoidance Wi-Fi. It's like, it becomes this concept that everything in this world is going to harm us. And there's just, having that as a core belief is just makes life really challenging. And people end up living in tents or living in just their room for a decade. And it's like, I really want people to know that they don't need to do that. And like, there is a way out, and it includes entering community and doing positive things in the world. And we don't have to be afraid of these things. We don't have to limit our lives and make them so small.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of other things. I don't talk about them yet because I don't want people to dismiss the stuff that we talk about in general. But I think there's so many other diseases and things that are, really that everybody knows about that is directly affected from the limbic system. And I think in time, people might have the courage to, talk about it because you
Mm-hmm.
might get backlashes if you were to hint on it. And I don't want to take credit away from all the other things that it can heal
Yeah.
because because the mind body thing is starting, I think, starting to come out slowly. And I want that momentum to open up more so people do more brain retraining, do more and
Yes.
discover it and heal. And then we can go, well, what else can it do?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Alrighty. So what are you doing now? Do you have your own um, program that you're supporting or fill
Yeah.
us in?
Yeah. So I work with Kathleen King, and so she has the Primal Trust program. I'm a teacher over there. I teach a lot about befriending emotions, befriending fear, kind of that second. She has Regulate program that helps with the limbic system, brain retraining, cycle toning. But then she has the second level of her mentorship, and that is really about who am I? How do I want to live in the world? What emotions are holding me back, or how is fear holding me back? And so that's my favorite stuff. So that's where I teach.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. You also have Instagrams, two Instagrams. Yeah.
Yeah, I have an Instagram that's at Turning Towards,
Yep.
and I post a lot of stuff on there.
Awesome. Yeah. When I post this video, I'll put the link at the bottom. You guys can follow it and show your support. And she's got some great stuff because she helped me through my journey. If it wasn't for you, I would have been stuck there, and who knows how long I would have been stuck there. Because I saw that also as a pattern. There were some people that were 5 years in the same spot, and they weren't willing to go towards the fear, and
Yeah.
that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we got you know what we got to have you back periodically because there's so many things that I still want to talk about, um, but I can't think of them right now.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'm happy to come back.
Yeah, okay, for sure. Okay, so thank you for being here, and we'll have you back. Awesome.
Good.
Bye bye.
Bye.